few times, will Senator Miriam withdraw from the race at any point? And you said, of course, in the presidential debate, no. But in DZMM, you said if you weren't running, that you may have endorsed Secretary Mar-Rojas, who you consider to be a friend in the Senate.
Yeah.
Do you still feel that way?
No.
Why?
Because I see in the field many pieces of evidence against his honesty and integrity in these elections. Government vehicles have been photographed, and the photos have been posted on Facebook, being used so that they could go from place to place and put up his posters. There are documented evidence that people are paid to attend these events. If that is the case, we return to my old theory that the presidency can be bought. That's why we don't need elections anymore. We just need to put up an auction off the presidency. Kung sino pinakamayaman.
So you don't think Secretary Mar-Rojas is true to daang matuwid?
That's right.
Okay.
It's very, very disappointing.
Okay. Now, among the candidates right now, you've taken pot shots at all of them. Who do you think is most dangerous for the country?
Duterte.
Why is that?
Right now, his most trusted man, Pastor Kibuloy of Davao City, has already announced that if the elections don't turn out Duterte, he is going to personally lead a revolution. What kind of talk is that? That is almost seditious. And this is from a man of the cloth. So, masyadong malalim itong Duterte na ito. Hindi kamukha noon na akala natin straight shooting lang siya na mayor at hindi siya nagkakapera. What about the plunder charge filed against him by Trillanes? We don't have any acceptable reason for all those accusations against him.
Now, you've called him as, in a way, close to the NPA, Senator Grace Poe, close to the CIA. I'm curious, if his closeness with the NPA brings us into peace talks or to resolve the issue with the NPA, wouldn't that be good for the country?
Only for the CIA or including the
NPA first, for the country. Because peace talks have bogged down with the NPA. If that works with Duterte's ties to the NPA, will that help?
I don't think so. You cannot tie communism, which is an ideology, down to words on paper. Nobody's going to pay any attention to those words. They will act on the basis of their own ideology, which is that government is bad. And always, government should, as much as possible, be given directly to the citizenry. Ibang pananaw nila sa ating demokrasya.
Now, what about Senator Grace Poe? She seems to be like she's always packaged herself as in a way, the stable candidate.
Well, if stability is the main characteristic of a presidential candidate, there are millions of people who are competent to run for president. Ang hinahanap nating presidente, una, marunong na tao. Nag-graduate ba with honors sa universidad yan? Dahil kung hindi, bakit natin iboboto ang pinakabobo sa klase o kaya isa sa pinakabobo just because he has a lot of propaganda going for him? Pangalawa, that person should have professional excellence. Dapat meron siyang mga awards na binigay din ng mga kapwa niya na recognizing his competence in the field. Eh, saan ang mga awards itong mga ito? Pangalawa, moral excellence. Ay, ngayon pa lang nakikita na natin ang mga hakbang na ginagawa nila para madaya nilang eleksyon. Kung ganun pala, as I said before, hindi tayo dapat maghalalan. Mag-auction na lang tayo.
Bingo!
And more creative. But today, I have what I did not have in 1992. I have wisdom, born of my experience in government. You cannot write about these things in books. You have to actually do them in the field.
Now, you've criticized, I mean, just when we were talking, you've mentioned Binay and Duterte are two people now with plunder cases. And you've never had any case filed against you that was related to plunder.
No.
This one is interesting because you chose to team up with Senator Bongbong Marcos, whose family has a deep history related to ill-gotten wealth. So how do you match that
Well, in the
with
first
your own
place,
values?
I decided to run pretty late. I was later than most because of my cancer. And then, in the second place, he's been my student in the UP College of Law. So I have personal knowledge of his intellectual competence. And although he did not finish in UP, he dropped out. And in the third place, he's been to Oxford. At least he's been exposed to the intellectual environment there, although he has a certificate of completion. Plus, lastly, I don't believe that the sins of the fathers should visit on the children. What kind of philosophy is that?
So right now, you're talking of a statistical tie between him and Leni Robredo. Tell us, what would the difference be if one of them wins as vice president? What would be the edge of the other and the weakness of another?
Oh, Bongbong would be more focused on gathering power and exercising it. Leni will be more focused on the humanitarian and welfare activities of the government.
So isn't that better then? I mean, is gathering power and exercising, I mean, do you say it as a negative thing or a positive thing?
Well, it depends on what he uses the power for.
Okay. So, people, you have Serge Osmeña saying that we'll be the laughing stock of the world if Senator Bongo or Marcos wins again for national office, higher office. Do you believe this to be true?
Of course not. The world is engrossed with many other problems. For example, in Europe, the problem of the European migrant refugees. That is such a bomb waiting to explode, and so on. The world is preoccupied with many other events. It has no time to make a laughing stock of a person in a tiny developing country that nobody ever heard of.
Okay. That's a bit brutal to say. But aren't we an emerging market where, like, we were once the basket case, now we are the shining light of Asia?
Those are encomiums paid by Filipinos to Filipinos.
So you don't believe this?
No.
What about our GDP numbers? I mean, under the Pinoy administration, you're talking about an average of a 6.1% growth in the last 5 years.
Statistics do not dictate economic prosperity. You can fudge the statistics in the first instance. We should see it in our day-to-day lives. You should see people walking in a well-ordered fashion, well-dressed for office, and in our streets. And we should have leaders of quality value.
Please.
Now we have a question from Ms. Ayo Carrego from.
Hi ma'am, earlier you said may isang kandidato na tinignan lang ng tao patay na, referring to Mayor Duterte. What do you think ma'am of Mayor Duterte's entry into the presidential race and human rights allegations?
Well, si Mayor Duterte, halos magkamukha lang yan kami. Kaya kami matalik magkaibigan. Kasi sometimes we descend to the level of hyperbole. Kung bang sinusobrahan mo ang sinasabi mo para mas epektibo, mas nakaka-catch attention ng nakikinig, pero hindi naman literally true. So, I think itong mga accusations of a so-called death squad or other terrorist actuations, dapat may reklamo sila noon pa. Noon pa yun eh. Istorya na yan noon pa. Baka 10 taon na. Kaya, ba't hindi siya inimbestiga? Ba't hindi nila pinag-file ng mga ganong kaso? Pag sinasabi niyang napatay ko yung tao na yun, he might mean on his orders according to law. Because may mga police circulars yan on how you can kill at will, kill on sight, and so on. May mga regulasyon yan. Paano patayin ang tao na ayon sa batas? Yan ang siguro ang ibig niyang sabihin. Pero wala namang tao magsasabing, ako ang nagpatay nitong kay ganito at i-describe niya mismo ang tao. That would be an admission against interest. and he will need the full panoply of judicial defense. So I think it can be disregarded unless there is weighty evidence as hyperbole. One of those things that politicians sometimes say, sometimes in an exaggerated way, to catch the attention of the public.
So you personally don't believe, ma'am, that he's behind all these extrajudicial killings?
Unless there is evidence. I was a former judge, and I'm always careful to make a distinction between hyperbole, exaggerated way of talking, and a serious piece of evidence that's not necessarily just testimonial by testimony, or may even consist of hard evidence. So we all have to obey the rules of court, particularly the rules on evidence.
Last two questions, one from Mr. Rafi Timo, GMA.
Follow up lang po dun sa first minute. So amenable po kayo dun sa sinasabi ng CHR that DOJ should look into the allegations against the Duterte?
Excuse me?
The CHR po is calling the DOJ to mag-investigate daw dun sa mga allegations. Are you amenable to that?
Well, all I can comment on, it's doing its job. It might even be overdoing its job, or it might be too late to do its job. Dahil itong mga puro-puro tungkol kay Mayor Duterte never materialized into anything, not even the filing of a complaint in court. So, the question there that relates in the minds of the supporters is, why was this accusation not taken seriously? More or less at the time when the alleged crimes were committed. Why only now that he has announced his candidacy for president? And by the way, now it becomes possibly an obstacle to his candidacy because these are crimes against humanity, or these are crimes against human rights. So that is the first question in the mind of the voter. Why is he being accused of crimes that appear to have happened decades ago, or at least several years ago? Even I, as a fellow presidential candidate, was asked this question.
Hans Age Miracle.
Does that affect you at this point? Or, I mean, you've run so many elections. Does that affect you when you see your 2-3%?
Of course.
Okay.
I say to myself, these guys are up to no good.
Okay.
These are criminals. They are trying to shape and manipulate the mind of the Filipino voter so that they can vindicate themselves. So in effect, we'll be allowing the survey firms to dictate to us who will be our candidates.
So you were saying you can influence the youth if you win as president. What else can we expect from a Miriam presidency?
Well, first of all, after finding a place for the youth in my government, I would run after the crooks, especially those in well-tailored suits. The crooks are all around us, but
So
they're
you want
well-dressed.
big fish.
Yeah.
Would you push, for example, let's say, I mean, you've seen the Senate subcommittee hearings against Vice President Binay. Under your term, would you pursue that more cases be filed against the Vice President and that he's prosecuted?
If he refuses to defend himself, the problem is there is a lot of evidence against him, and there is no evidence in his favor because he just remains at denying everything.
Now, when it comes to President Aquino and the other members of government who were responsible for the DAP, do you believe the next president should still pursue cases against them?
Oh yes, it should be part of a continuing effort.
Oh, really?
Because corruption is so embedded in our bureaucracy. You cannot get rid of it in a month or 6 months. That's talking through your hat.
But
It took me nearly a year to clean up Commission on Immigration and Deportation, and for that I received the Magsaysay Award for Government Service, quote, for bold and moral leadership in cleaning up a corrupt governmental agency. So I was commended by Magsaysay Awards for my fight against corruption, and it took me nearly a year. Now here are these candidates saying, I can get rid of it in 6 months, in 3 months, giving themselves the self-imposed, self-serving deadlines.
so why do you think, I'm curious, this was in the 90s when you were customs chief. Why do you think has corruption been prevalent right after? I mean, why?
Because there is no deterrent action from the judicial system, since you do not give it a chance to discipline those who have violated the law. That should be the case. If under a rule of law, if any provision of any of our anti-corruption laws has been violated, then that turns into judicial evidence.
Okay.
So, one more thing. In these plunder cases against the 3 senators, why is one senator singled out? And for so-called humanitarian reasons, unquote, which is not included in the Constitution as exceptions.
So you believe that Senator Juan Ponce Enrile should not have been granted bail?
No. Or all of them should have been granted bail if that was the perspective of the justices, or none of them would have been granted bail, but you cannot grant bail to just one. Why?
Now, would you want to be a Supreme Court justice? I mean, I think the next president will be appointing a total of 11 or 19 justices in different levels. At this point in your life, are you still interested?
No. I gave up my position in the International Criminal Court because I was sick at that time.